And welcome back. My next guest is Ray Botto, a World War II veteran. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being my guest, and thank you for your service to our country. As you know, on this program, Hometown Happenings, I really like to make sure that we always have a veteran on the program and to kind of talk about their service, local veteran from our town. And so we're honored to really have you on to be the veteran's guest on this segment for what is now our 39th episode. We've been doing this for about 3 years now, since I've been supervisor, and it's great to be able to have you on to speak a little bit about your experience. But before we get to your service in World War II, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your family background, how long you've lived here, and what have you.
I came here in 1962, February, and at that time I had 4 children. My 5th child was born here in the county and has a business in town. And my wife is gone now 13 years.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But she was a good woman. And let me tell you, God was good to me. And the kids did well, and they're scattered all over the world right now. But that's my background as far as that's concerned. I graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy and was commissioned in World War II, and I served in World War II in the Merchant Marine, and again in the Navy during the Korean War.
So let's talk a little bit about what led you to join. So you were talking off camera before about you know, the draft was 21 at the start of World War II, and then they moved it to 18 in 1943. So you were sworn in and received an appointment 4 days before you turned 18?
True, in San Francisco, California.
Right. So you went into the Merchant Marine Academy?
No, that was a cadet corps. They had 2 basic training centers, one in San Mateo, California, and one in Pass Christian, Mississippi. And they were in the process of building the Kings Point. And it was dedicated in 1943.
Okay.
So that's the day, about the time I went in. I had a brother, 5 years older, that was a cadet midshipman at the Merchant Marine Academy at the time, and was doing his sea project, or sea duty.
Right.
And talked me into deciding to go into the Merchant Marine. And so I didn't know which way I wanted to go. At that time, I was working and going to what's now NJIT in Newark, New Jersey. I was studying mechanical engineering. And I was really ripe for a program, for example. And so at that time, they took somebody from each state. I was living in New Jersey, and they took about 10 a month from New Jersey. They were always over quota. Finally, they advised me that I had been put on the eligibility list, and I was sent out to California. And after the basic training program, I was able to come home on leave, and I left for my sea tour, which involves a sea project, and you're checked on by inspectors along the way. And I was doing my sea project and doing my sea duty for the time from 1943, December, into June of 44. And one of those trips was from San Francisco, California, to Australia. We were supposed to go to New Guinea, but because of typhoons and one thing or another, we were bringing ammunition to Brisbane, Australia. From Brisbane, went down to Sydney. Sydney loaded up a Australian cargo for Fremantle or Perth. Went up the island or up the continent to a little place called Geraldton. Loaded a load of wheat for the Australian and British troops in Italy. And we went through the Indian Ocean, up through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, to Port Said. Those days we called it Port Said. But at that time, we were never with a convoy before, but this time through the Mediterranean, I was with about 100-ship convoy with the barrage balloons and that sort of thing to avoid strafing and that sort of thing. Came into Augusta, Sicily, went up to Bari, Italy, and that's where the bombings took place. They were bombing from Greece over into that area each night. And there were like 21 ships sunk in that harbor, 17 in one day.
Wow.
Thank heavens I wasn't there at that time. And then from that point, we went to Oran, Morocco, loaded up prisoners of war, about 200 of them. They housed them in the 'tween decks. This was a Liberty ship. And in the holes was defective ammunition that they were bringing back to the United States. And we discharged those passengers in Newport News, Virginia. So that was my trip around the world. And from that point, I went to the academy.
That was all before the age of 19?
Yes, I graduated high school at 16. Those days I didn't go to kindergarten. Went right into first grade. My birthday being in August, I was in the first grade at like 5 and one month. And so I graduated before my 17th birthday at age 16. I got a job right away and enrolled in college at night for 2 terms. And that's brought me up to 1943.
And so after that first tour, then what happened?
Well, those days the program was only 2 years of age, 2 years long. And what happened was I graduated, and I was commissioned in the maritime, in the Navy as an ensign, and I had a 3rd assistant license as an engineering officer in the Merchant Marine. So listen to my brother. I was going to go into the Navy right off the bat, but he talked me into going on one trip. That trip lasted well over a year to the Pacific. We brought a load of dry stores, food products, from Bayonne, New Jersey, through the Panama Canal out to the Philippines, to Samar with a deck cargo of PT boats. Actually, the commander of that group was aboard. It's the same commander, a fellow by the name of Cox, who took MacArthur off Corregidor.
Oh, really?
Really,
Wow.
yeah. And we landed in Manila, finally. Anchorage 210, I still remember to this day. And we were there for several months. Because what happened, the end of the war took place. Navy went home. We had Navy cargo on board. And it was just like going to the shopping center. You know, we had hatch tents up on each hatch. And what would happen would be the individual boats would come up and order like a ton of this, a ton of that at different holes, just like you'd go to a shopping market, do your weekly shopping. And with 10,000 tons of the stuff on board, took a long time to get rid of, especially when the Navy decided to pull people home. And they did go home in October somewhere, and there we were with 10 tons of this stuff on board. And you can just imagine the vermin running around that ship, because what happened was a congressional group came out in the early part of the 2046, or rather 1946, I'm sorry about that, and investigated. And they dispatched the ships from that harbor, so no ships were in there, and they were dispatched to places like Okinawa, where we discharged that cargo, and went up the island 60 miles, came back to Naha, Okinawa, loaded the same type of cargo up again, finally limped into Japan, Yokohama, had some boiler work done, and came home to Oakland, California.
Wow.
To discharge that cargo back home. So that was that particular trip at the end of the war took us into July of 1946.
Wow.
I continued with the Merchant Marine until 48, came off the sea, went to work for public service, electric and gas for a while, got married. And in 1950, the Korean conflict, they called it, took place, and the Navy sent me a letter asking me if I'd volunteer for a year. The Atlantic Fleet, this was. And so with the war starting over in Korea and so forth, I talked to my wife, who was married a year. She wasn't too happy, but she agreed for a year. It wasn't too bad. And we did get together, and I rented a place, different places when we were not at sea, and we were in the shipyard or something like that. But I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. At that time, I was promoted already to a junior grade officer. And finally, after the second year, I was promoted to lieutenant, retired, stayed in the reserve program for a total of 22 years, and retired as a lieutenant commander.
Wow.
Yeah. In the meantime, I applied for a degree for Kings Point for the Bachelor of Science. I made up the deficiencies at Rutgers and continued on at Drexel and got a master's in business. And, you know, lived my life. I worked at AT&T, retired from them, and I was like I used to say, a weekend warrior. I used to do the organized reserve bit for 22 years total. And so that's my service.
Well, thank you so very much. And they're fascinating stories, too, because, you know, it certainly wasn't the same. It kind of dramatized, you know, at a in Hollywood. But one of my favorite films of all times is Mr. Roberts. And,
oh, yeah. I was a Mr. Roberts type, but an engineer.
Yeah. So you
my
were,
brother was the mate.
Yeah. So you were a similar type ship, you know,
Yeah.
you know, moving cargo and just how essential that is. And you had the perspective of doing that, you know, both in the but you know, in the Merchant Marines, you know, and really around the world. You saw more of the world than probably most people will ever see.
Oh, yeah.
And by the time you were 20 years old.
Yes, I did. I really did. They actually, there was a film made about a cadet. We lost 142 individuals. It's the only academy of the federal academies that can fly a battle standard, which means that they are under fire as they progress through their midshipman or cadet series.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you know, Ray, I want to thank you for being such a great guest. We're pretty much out of time, but I want to thank you for being such a great guest, and I want to thank you for your long and distinguished service to our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So stay tuned for the rest of the show.